And now a continuation of The Day of the Triffids by John Wyndham, a one-take toilet top audiobook production as read by The Bathroom Reader, filling in for the Plurality Report, who was so upset that I flubbed the introduction last video that he had a total mental breakdown and has since undergone a complete personality change. Chapter 12. Dead End. That's the kind of warning I don't debate about. I pulled up. The man was large and fair-haired. He handled his rifle with familiarity. Without taking it out of the aim, he jerked his head twice sideways. I accepted that as a sign to climb down. When I had done so, I displayed my empty hands. Another man, accompanied by a girl, emerged from behind the stationary truck as I approached it. Coker's voice called from behind me. "Better put out that rifle, chum. You're all in the open." The fair man's eyes left mine to search for Coker. I could have jumped him then if I'd wanted to, but I said, "He's right anyway. We're peaceful." The man lowered his rifle, not quite convinced. Coker emerged from the cover of my truck, which had hidden his exit from his own. "What's the big idea? Dog eat dog?" he inquired. "Only two of you?" the second man asked. Coker looked at him. "What would you be expecting? A convention?" "Yes, just two of us." The trio visibly relaxed. The fair man explained. "We thought you might be a gang from the city. We've been expecting them here, raiding for food." "Ah," said Coker. "From which we assume that you've not taken a look at any city lately. If that's your own worry, you might as well forget it. What gangs there are more likely to be working the other way around, at present. In fact, doing, if I may say so, just what you are." "You don't think they'll come?" "I'm darn sure they won't." He regarded the three. "Do you belong to Beardley's lot?" he asked. The response was convincingly blank. "Pity," said Coker. "That have been our first real stroke of luck in quite a time." "What is our Beardley's lot?" inquired the fair man. I was feeling wilted and dry after some hours in the driving cab with the sun on it. I suggested that we might remove discussion from the middle of the street to some more congenial spot. We passed round their trucks, through a familiar litter of cases of biscuits, chests of tea, sides of bacon, sacks of sugar, blocks of salt, and all the rest of it, to a small bar parlor next door. Over pint pots, Coker and I gave them a short resume of what we'd done and what we knew. They were an oddly assorted trio. The fair-haired man turned out to be a member of the stock exchange by the name of Stephen Burnell. His companion was a good-looking, well-built girl with an occasional superficial petulance, but no real surprise over whatever life might hand her next. She had led one of those fringe careers, modeling dresses, selling them, putting in movie extra work, missing opportunities of going to Hollywood, hostessing for obscure clubs, and helping out these activities by such other means as offered themselves. She had an utterly unshakable conviction that nothing serious could have happened to America, and that it was only a matter of holding out for a while until the Americans arrived to put everything in order. She was quite the least troubled person I had encountered since the catastrophe took place, though just occasionally she pined a little for the bright lights which she hoped the Americans would hurry up and restore. The third member, the dark young man, nursed a grudge. He had worked hard and saved hard in order to start his small radio store, and he had ambitions. "Look at Ford," he told us, "and look at Lord Newfield. He started with a bike shop no bigger than my radio store, and see where he got to. That's the kind of thing I was going to do. And now look at the damn mess things are in. It ain't fair. Fate, as he saw it, didn't want any more Fords or Newfields, but he didn't intend to take that lying down. This was only an interval sent to try him. One day would see him back in his radio store with his foot set firmly on the first rung to millionairedom. The most disappointing thing about them was to find that they knew nothing of the Michael Beadley party. Indeed, the only group they had encountered was in a village just over the Devon border, where a couple of men with shotguns had advised them not to come that way again. Those men, they said, were obviously local. Coker suggested that meant a small group. If they had belonged to a large one, they'd have shown less nervousness and more curiosity, he maintained. But if the Beadley lot are around here, we ought to be able to find them somehow. He put it to the fair man. Look here, suppose we come along with you. We can do our work, and when we do find them, it will make things easier for all of us. The three of them looked questioningly at one another, and then nodded. All right, give us a hand with the loading, and we'll be getting along, the man agreed. By the look of Charcot Old House, it had once been a fortified manor. Refortification was now underway. At some time in the past, the encircling moat had been drained. Stephen, however, was of the opinion that he had successfully ruined the drainage system so that it would fill up again by degrees. It was his plan to blow out such parts as had been filled in, and thus complete the re-encirclement. Our news, suggesting that this might not be necessary, induced a slight wistfulness in him and a look of disappointment. The stone walls of the house were thick. At least 3 of the windows in the front displayed machine guns, and he pointed out 2 more mounted on the roof. Inside the main door was stacked a small arsenal of mortars and bombs, and, as he proudly pointed out, several flamethrowers. We found an arms depot, he explained, and spent a day getting this lot together. As I looked over the stuff, I realized for the first time that the catastrophe, by its very thoroughness, had been more merciful than the things that would have followed a slightly lesser disaster. Had 10 or 15% of the population remained unharmed, it was very likely that little communities like this would indeed have found themselves fighting off starving gangs in order to preserve their own lives. As things were, however, Stephen had probably made his warlike preparations in vain, but there was one appliance that could be put to good use. I pointed to the flamethrowers. Those might be handy for Triffids, I said. He grinned. You're right. Very effective. The one thing we've used him for. And incidentally, the one thing I know that really makes a Triffid beat it. You can go on firing at them until they're shot to bits and they don't budge. I suppose they don't know where the destruction's coming from, but one warm lick from this and they're plunging off fit to bust themselves. Have you had a lot of trouble with them? I asked. It seemed that they had not. From time to time, perhaps 2 or 3 would approach and be scorched away. On their expeditions, they had had several lucky escapes, but usually they were out of their vehicles only in built-up areas where there was little likelihood of prowling Triffids. That night, after dark, we all went up to the roof. It was too early for the moon. We looked out upon an utterly black landscape. Search it as we would, not one of us was able to discover the least pinpoint of a telltale light. Nor could any of the party recall ever having seen a trace of smoke by day. I was feeling depressed when we descended again to the lamp-lit living room. There's only one thing for it, then, Coker said. We'll have to divide the district up into areas and search them. But he did not say it with conviction. I suspected that he was thinking it likely, as I was, that the Beadley party would continue to show deliberate light by night and some other sign, probably a smoke column, by day. However, no one had any better suggestion to make, so we got down to the business of dividing the map up into sections, doing our best to contrive that each should include some high ground to give an extensive view beyond it. The following day, we went into the town in a truck, and from there dispersed in smaller cars for the search. That was, without a doubt, the most melancholy day I had spent since I had wandered about Westminster, searching for traces of Josella there. Just at first, it wasn't too bad. There was the open road in the sunlight, the fresh green of early summer. There were signposts which pointed to Exeter and the West, and other places, as if they still pursued their habitual lives. There were sometimes, though rarely, birds to be seen, and there were wild flowers beside the lanes looking as they had always looked. But the other side of the picture was not as good. There were fields in which cattle lay dead or wandered blindly, and untended cows lowed in pain. Where sheep in their easy discouragement had stood resignedly to die rather than pull themselves free from bramble or barbed wire, and other sheep grazed erratically or starved helplessly with looks of reproach in their blind eyes. Farms were becoming unpleasant places to pass closely. For safety's sake, I was giving myself only an inch of ventilation at the top of the window, but I closed even that whenever I saw a farm beside the road ahead. Triffids were at large. Sometimes I saw them crossing fields or noticed them inactive against hedges. In more than one farmyard they had found the middens to their liking and enthroned themselves there while they waited for the dead stock to attain the right stage of putrescence. I saw them now with a disgust that they had never roused in me before. Horrible alien things, which some of us had somehow created, and which the rest of us, in our careless greed, had cultured all over the world. One could not even blame nature for them. Somehow they had been bred, just as we had bred for ourselves beautiful flowers or grotesque parodies of dogs. I began to loathe them now on account of more than their carrion-eating habits, for they, more than anything else, seemed able to profit and flourish on our disaster. As the day went on, my sense of loneliness grew. On any hill or rise, I stopped to examine the country as far as the field grasses would show me. Once I saw smoke and went to the source to find a small railway train burned out on the line. I still do not know how that could be, for there was no one near it. Another time a flag upon a staff sent me hurrying to a house to find it silent, though not empty. Yet another time a white flutter of movement on a distant hillside caught my eye, but when I turned the glasses on it, I found it to be half a dozen sheep milling in panic, while a Triffid struck continually and ineffectively across their woolly backs. Nowhere could I see a sign of living human beings. When I stopped for food, I did not linger longer than I needed. I ate it quickly, listening to a silence that was beginning to get on my nerves, and anxious to be on my way again, with at least the sound of the car for company. One began to fancy things. Once I saw an arm waving from a window, but when I got there it was only a branch swaying in front of the window. I saw a man stop in the middle of a field and turn to watch me go by, but the glasses showed me that he couldn't have stopped or turned. He was a scarecrow. I heard voices calling to me, just discernible above the engine noise. I stopped and switched off. There were no voices, nothing but far, far away the plaint of an unmilked cow. It came to me that here and there, dotted about the country, there must be men and women who were believing themselves to be utterly alone, sole survivors. I felt as sorry for them as for anyone else in this disaster. During the afternoon, with lowered spirits and little hope, I kept doggedly on, quartering my section of the map because I dared not risk failing to make my inner certainty sure. At last, however, I satisfied myself that if any sizable party did exist in the area I had been allotted, it was deliberately hiding. It had not been possible for me to cover every lane and by-road, but I was willing to swear that the sound of my by no means feeble horn had been heard in every acre of my sector. I finished up and drove back to the place where we had parked the truck in the gloomiest mood I had yet known. I found that none of the others had shown up yet, so to pass the time, and because I needed it to keep out the spiritual cold, I turned into the nearby pub and poured myself a good brandy. Stephen was the next to return. The expedition seemed to have affected him much as it had me, for he shook his head in answer to my questioning look and made straight for the bottle I had opened. 10 minutes later, the radio ambitionist joined us. He brought with him a disheveled, wild-eyed young man who appeared not to have washed or shaved for several weeks. This person had been on the road. It was, it seemed, his only profession. One evening, he could not say for certain of what day, he had found a fine, comfortable barn in which to spend the night. Having done somewhat more than his usual quota of miles that day, he had fallen asleep almost as soon as he lay down. The next morning he had awakened in a nightmare, and he still seemed a little uncertain whether it was the world or himself that was crazy. We reckoned he was a little, anyway, but he still retained a clear knowledge of the use of beer. Another half hour or so passed, and then Coker arrived. He had had no better luck than Stephen and I. Back in Charcot's old house, that evening we gathered again around the map. Coker started to mark out new areas of search. We watched him without enthusiasm. It was Stephen who said what all of us, including, I think, Coker himself, were thinking. "Look here. We've been all over the ground for a circle of some 15 miles between us. It's clear that they aren't in the immediate neighbourhood. Either your information is wrong, or you decided not to stop here and went on. In my view, it would be a waste of time to go on searching the way we did today." Coker laid down the compass he was using. "Then what do you suggest?" "Well, it seems to me we could cover a lot of ground pretty quickly from the air, and well enough. You can bet your life that anyone who hears an aircraft engine is going to turn out and make a sign of some kind." Coker shook his head. "Now, why didn't we think of that before? It ought to be a helicopter, of course. But where do we get one? And who's going to fly it?" "Oh, I can make one of them things go all right," said the radio man confidently. There was something in his tone. "Have you ever flown one?" asked Coker. "No," admitted the radio man. "But I reckon there'd not be a lot to it once you got the knack." Said Coker, looking at him with reserve. Stephen recalled the locations of 2 RAF stations not far away, and that there had been an air taxi business operating from Yeovil. In spite of our doubts, the radio man was as good as his word. He seemed to have complete confidence that his instinct for mechanism would not let him down. After practicing for half an hour, he took the helicopter off and flew it back to Charcot. For 4 days, the machine hovered around in widening circles. On 2 of them, Coker observed. On the other 2, I replaced him. In all, we discovered 10 little groups of people. None of them knew anything about the Beadley party, and none of them contained Josella. As we found each lot, we landed. Usually they were in 2s and 3s. The largest was 7. They would greet us in hopeful excitement, but soon, when they found that we represented only a group similar to their own, and were not the spearhead of any rescue party on the grand scale, their interest would lapse. We could offer them little that they had not got already. Some of them became irrationally abusive and threatening in their disappointment, but most simply dropped back into despondency. As a rule, they showed little wish to join up with other parties and were inclined rather to lay hands on what they could, building themselves into refuges as comfortably as possible while they waited for the arrival of the Americans, who were bound to find a way. There seemed to be a widespread and fixed idea about this. Our suggestions that any surviving Americans would be likely to have their hands more than full at home was received as so much wet blanketry. The Americans, they assured us, would never have allowed such a thing to happen in their country. Nevertheless, and in spite of this macabre fixation on American fairy godmothers, we left each party with a map showing them the approximate positions of groups we had already discovered, in case they should change their minds and think about getting together for self-help. As a task, the flights were far from enjoyable, but at least they were to be preferred to lonely scouting on the ground. However, at the end of the fruitless fourth day, it was decided to abandon the search. At least that was what the rest of them decided. I did not feel the same way about it. My quest was personal, theirs was not. Whoever they found, now or eventually, would be strangers to them. I was searching for Beadley's party as a means, not an end in itself. If I should find them and discover that Josella was not with them, then I should go on searching. But I could not expect the rest to devote any more time to searching purely on my behalf. Curiously, I realized that in all this I had met no other person who was searching for someone else. Every one of them had been, save for the accident of Stephen and his girlfriend, snapped clean away from friends or relatives to link him with the past, and was beginning a new life with people who were strangers. Only I, as far as I could see, had promptly formed a new link, and that so briefly that I had scarcely been aware how important it was to me at the time. Once the decision to abandon the search had been taken, Coker said, "All right, then that brings us to thinking about what we're going to do for ourselves." "Which means laying in stores against the winter and just going on as we are." "What else should we do?" asked Stephen. "I've been thinking about that," Coker told him. "Maybe it'd be all right for a while, but what happens afterwards?" "If we do run short of stocks, well, there's plenty more lying around," said the radio man. "The Americans will be here before Christmas," said Stephen's girlfriend. "Listen," Coker told her patiently, "just put the Americans in the jam tomorrow pie in the sky department a while, will you? Try to imagine a world in which there aren't any Americans. Can you do that?" The girl stared at him. "But there must be," she said. Coker sighed sadly. He turned his attention to the radio man. "There won't always be those stores. The way I see it, we've been given a flying start in a new kind of world. We're endowed with a capital of enough of everything to begin with, but that isn't going to last forever. We couldn't eat up all the stuff that's there for the taking, not in generations, if it would keep. But it isn't going to keep. A lot of it is going to go bad pretty rapidly, and not only food. Everything is going, more slowly but quite surely, to drop to pieces. If we want fresh stuff to eat next year, we shall have to grow it ourselves. And it may seem a long way off now, but there's going to come a time when we shall have to grow everything ourselves. There'll come a time, too, when all the tractors are worn out or rusted and there's no more gas to run them. Anyway, when we'll come right down to nature and bless horses, if we've got 'em." "This is a pause, just a heaven-sent pause, while we get over the first shock and start to collect ourselves. But it's no more than a pause. Later we'll have to plough. Still later we'll have to learn how to make ploughshares. Later than that, we'll have to learn how to smelt the iron to make the shares. What we are on now is a road that will take us back and back and back until we can, if we can, make good all that we wear out. Not until then shall we be able to stop ourselves on the trail that's leading down to savagery. But once we can do that, then maybe we'll begin to crawl slowly up again." He looked round the circle to see if we were following him. "We can do that, if we will. The most valuable part of our flying start is knowledge. That's the shortcut to save us starting where our ancestors did. We've got it all there in the books if we take the trouble to find out about it." The rest were looking at Coker curiously. It was the first time they had heard him in one of his oratorical moods. "Now," he went on, "from my reading of history, the thing you have to use is knowledge and is leisure. where everybody has to work hard just to get a living, and there is leisure to think, knowledge stagnates, and people with it. The thinking has to be done largely by people who are not directly productive, by people who appear to be living almost entirely on the work of others, but are in fact a long-term investment. Learning grew up in the cities and in great institutions. It was the labour of the countryside that supported them. Similarly, we must become big enough to support at very least the leader, the teacher, and the doctor. Well, said Stephen after a pause. I've been thinking of that place Bill and I saw at Tyneside. We've told you about it. The woman who is trying to run it wanted help, and she wanted it badly. She has about 50 or 60 people on her hands, and a dozen or so of them are able to see. That way she can't do it. She knows she can't, but she wasn't going to admit it to us. She wasn't going to put herself in our debt by asking us to stay. But she'd be very glad if we were to go back there after all, and ask to be admitted. Good Lord, I said, you don't think she deliberately put us on the wrong track? I don't know. I may be doing her an injustice, but it is an odd thing that we've not seen or heard a single sign of Beadley in the company, isn't it? Anyhow, whether she meant it or not, that's the way it works, because I've decided to go back there. If you want my reasons, here they are. The two main ones. First, unless that place is taken in hand, it's going to crash, which would be a waste and a shame for all those people there. The other is that it is much better situated than this. It has a farm which should not take a whole lot of putting in order. It is practically self-contained, but could be extended if necessary. This place would cost a lot more labour to start and to work. More important, it is big enough to afford time for teaching both the present blind that there and the sighted children they'll have later on. I believe it can be done, and I'll do my best to do it. And if the haughty Miss Durant can't take it, she can go jump in the river. Now the point is this. I think I could do it as it stands, but I know that if the lot of us were to go, we could get the place reorganized and running in a few weeks. Then we'd be living in a community that's going to grow and make a damn good attempt to hold its own. The alternative is to stay in a small party which is going to decline and get more desperately lonely as time goes on. So, how about it? There was some debate and inquiry for details, but not much doubt. Those of us who had been out on the search had had a glimpse of the awful loneliness that might come. No one was attached to the present house. It had been chosen for defensible qualities, and had little more to commend it. Most of them could feel the oppression of isolation growing round them already. The thought of wider and more varied company was in itself attractive. The end of an hour found the discussion dealing with questions of transport and details of the removal, and the decision to adopt Coker's suggestion had more or less made itself. Only Stephen's girlfriend was doubtful. This place, Tyneside, it's pretty much off the map, she asked uneasily. Don't you worry, Coker assured her. It's marked on all the best American maps. It was some time in the early hours of the following morning that I knew I was not going to Tyneside with the rest. Later, perhaps, I would, but not yet. My first inclination had been to accompany them, if only for the purpose of choking the truth out of Miss Durant regarding the Beadley party's destination. But then I had to make again the disturbing admission that I did not know that Josella was with them, and indeed all the information I had been able to collect so far suggested that she was not. She had pretty certainly not passed through Tyneside, but if she had not gone in search of them, then where had she gone? It was scarcely likely that there had been a second direction in the university building, one that I had missed. And then, as if it had been a flash of light, I recalled the discussion we had had in our commandeered apartment. I could see her sitting there in her blue party frock, with the light of the candles catching the diamonds as we talked. What about the Sussex Downs? I know a lovely old farmhouse on the north side. And then I knew what I must do. I told Coker about it in the morning. He was sympathetic, but obviously anxious not to raise my hopes too much. Okay, you do as you think best, he agreed. I hope. Well, anyway, you'll know where we are, and you can both come on to Tyneside and help to put that woman through the hoop until she sees sense. That morning the weather broke. The rain was falling in sheets as I climbed once more into the familiar truck, yet I was feeling elated and hopeful. It could have rained 10 times harder without depressing me or altering my intention. Coker came out to see me off. I knew why he'd made a point of it, for I was aware, without his telling me, that the memory of his first rash plan and its consequences troubled him. He stood beside the cab, with his hair flattened and the water trickling down his neck, and held up his hand. Take it easy, Bill. There aren't any ambulances these days, and she'll prefer you to arrive all in one piece. Good luck, and my apologies for everything to the lady when you find her. The word was when, but the tone was if. I wished them well at Tyneside. Then I let in the clutch and splashed away down the muddy drive.